Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest TBU Podcast. Today, we are talking all about DC FanDome and more specifically movies. As FanDome wraps up, obviously, I should start off by saying thanks for being here, everybody. Listeners, we greatly appreciate you guys taking a listen to the reboot or the return of the TBU podcast. And while I did kind of an intro episode last week, this week we're going to jump straight into a lot of the news. And I've got with me two of the staff members that are actually that you guys see content from and have seen content from in the past. I have Scott and Adil with me today, and we're going to be talking specifically all about the movie news that came out of DC FanDome over the next couple of weeks, because obviously once FanDome happens, there's always a lull of news afterwards. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be having episodes dedicated to movies, television, and video games, and we're also going to be discussing some merchandise scattered here and there that pertains to some of these projects that we're going to be talking about. But specifically, today's episode is all about the movies because, let's be honest, FanDome was highly anticipated for a very specific reason, and that was the trailer for the Batman from Matt Reeves, Robert Pattinson, Zoe Kravitz. They not only revealed the trailer, which was kind of like the grand finale of the entire event, but they also had kind of a behind-the-scenes footage, kind of like a featurette that you would typically see as part of the special features, talking about the making of the movie. And then Matt Reeves sat down with Robert Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz in a virtual setting, and they talked about kind of how they landed the roles, the chemistry between Pattinson and Kravitz, and not a whole lot of what to expect from the movie, but more of how the movie came to be. And there was a little bit of hints about what to expect, but most of the stuff we've already heard in the past. So before we get into the trailer, which is obviously going to be the bulk of our conversation here, let's talk about the behind the scenes stuff. Some of this we've seen, some of it we have not seen, but it's essentially this is a very dark and violent and very rageful Batman, and they said that the Batman that we're going to be seeing we're not seeing an origin story because we've seen that plenty of times in the past, but instead we're seeing a Batman that has actually come on and is very new to being in the role of Batman, but is more established. He already has a relationship with the GCPD and obviously Jim Gordon. We're not seeing him become Batman. We're more seeing him come into the role of Batman. So what did you guys think of what they showed for what we can expect to see from this new movie?
I don't know. Well, overall, it looks great. Like the more I see of it, the more excited I am for it. So, and I like that it's not, we're not going back to the basics or starting over necessarily. It's just kind of, to put it this way, one of the things I thought was like the biggest failing of like the last incarnate, or the Nolan incarnation, I should say, that's 2 ago, is that as far as like the world around, like Batman and the characters, it didn't really feel like lived in or like its own character. And so the more we see of this is very much like a lived in playground that they put together.
I would definitely agree by that statement. The Gotham City, as we know, is a character in and of itself. And it's nice to see a film kind of use that character as a primary focus. And I will say I got some kind of Blade Runner vibes when they first do that the takedown of the Riddler at the very beginning. I don't know why exactly, but for some reason, as I was watching that, I was like, this feels darker and grittier than what we've seen in the past. Obviously, what we have seen has been very grounded. Obviously, what Chris Nolan did was touted as very grounded in reality. This feels like they took it even a step further, which I don't think a lot of people could have even assumed it could have been the case.
Yeah, I mean, so my reaction is that I absolutely loved it, the trailer. And I think it's interesting that, Scott brought up just the comparison of, what we saw in this trailer to what we saw in the Nolan movies. And I think one of the things that I didn't like, for the record, I love the Nolan trilogy. But one of the things I think they didn't really do that well in the Nolan trilogy was the action scenes. And just from the few 2-minute trailer that we got, I think we're going to get some much better action scenes with this movie. It's very clear to me that there's some like real filmmaking going on here. And, just to contrast it with, the movies that Zack Snyder made, he created some very interesting visuals, but I think you did them using like computer generated effects. And to me, at least, it's very obvious when, there is a computer generated effect, and it kind of doesn't look as real. And for a character like, Batman, who isn't, super powered or anything, I think it just feels like it just looks more natural when, the effects are more, they're more practical effects and not CGI effects.
Hands down, practical effects are the way to go, especially with something that is intended to be grounded. Obviously, you're always going to have some things that are going to be computer generated. Nolan did some really cool practical effects with some of the stuff he did. And I think that's one of the reasons why The Dark Knight was so well liked, was because the effects that they were doing were very grounded and were in most cases very practical.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when it comes to things like that, like the practical effects and everything, honestly, I feel like you hit to the point of it, is that, when you have a lot of these practical effects or a lot of, things you're building that are concrete and real, and you don't have to rely on a special effects team, is that you can really, you can play around with your camera more, get different angles, different shots, approach it differently than what you've storyboarded beforehand, and not have to provide some kind of canvas for the special effects team to fill in later, which, as cool as those things can look, and as vibrant and visual as they look, it kind of takes away from, simple composition and editing, that can really amp up the tension or what emotion you're trying to convey in the moment.
All right, so let's talk about some of the things that we saw in the trailer. Obviously, going into the film, we knew that there's a couple of specific characters that were going to make an appearance. Outside of Batman, which is fairly obvious, this is the first time that Alfred pops up. Jim Gordon pops up, which we already have seen him in the previous trailer. We obviously see Selena Kyle. We see what we believe is the Riddler, because while they never actually show his face, we know Paul Dano is playing the Riddler, and it's fairly obvious who they're leading to when the character becomes the Riddler. But they were very coy about not showing the character's face in the two appearances that he popped up this time. And obviously in the last trailer, he had a mask of some sort. So we see the Riddler. We also see more of Colin Farrell's Penguin. And there's a lot of other characters that haven't even appeared yet. But the real question is, which one stood out to you outside of Batman? Which character's appearance this time around stood out to you more than the rest?
I would say Penguin. The interpretation Colin Farrell's going with, or Matt Reeves, whoever, it's probably a joint effort. But, Penguin, is in a lot of media, he's always kind of like this stodgy, British type of, crime boss character. But here he's like more of a, I don't know, I guess like a, maybe Brooklyn. I don't know what the accent is, but kind of like a bruiser, East Coast bruiser type. Kind of reminded me more of like a Jake LaMotta archetype than, some, British crime boss. And I really like that angle, especially since, we're seeing more of the mob aspect of it. So to me, that probably stole the show for me.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing about, the Penguin there is the job that the hair and makeup team have done with Colin Farrell's look. Like, he's completely unrecognizable, and it's seamless. Like you when you look at him, in the shots that they've shown so far, you don't even feel like, oh, this is someone wearing makeup. You actually think that this is someone who has, really transformed into the role. Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman, she looks like she is going to be the best one so far. And I know that's high praise considering Michelle Pfeiffer was really good in the 89 version. But I think, that's what we're going to see. As far as inspirations go, for this movie, Matt Reeves has, I think, said that they're really drawing from Year One. But I also think, Earth One's obviously, I think, an obvious inspiration for this. But what I thought was really interesting, just based on the trailers, was that I think they might be drawing from the Telltale games a bit. And what I mean by that is I think we might be seeing a version of the Waynes, or specifically Thomas Wayne, that is perhaps a little less than the pure ethical figure he's normally portrayed to be.
I agree. And I think that I've seen some things online talking about how the combination of Selena Kyle and Riddler and Penguin all appearing in this one film, along with the fact that we know that that Falcone is actually going to be appearing in the film as well. It's very possible that, well, at least some of the people online have been talking about how it could be drawing a lot of inspiration from Long Halloween, that not so perfect version of Thomas Wayne could come into play. I think that Zoe Kravitz Catwoman, or Selena Kyle, because I don't know that she's actually going to go by Catwoman in the film. I think they're going to play into that idea that she doesn't have that role yet, because none of what they've shown of the character has her in anything outside of just a cat burglar costume. So I think that she's not really that character of Catwoman yet. But the few shots that they showed of her, I think it's perfect. She's definitely, and I could see just from the trailer alone that chemistry that they were talking about between Zoe and Robert. I could see them playing off of each other in those few short scenes that they had interacting with each other that was present inside of the trailer. Going back to Penguin with the prosthetics, I mean, insane how well done that is. It's crazy to think. I remember reading that Colin Farrell was going to be playing the Penguin, or Oswald Cobblepot, and then when they initially showed the character in the trailer last year, it was, or there were some spy photos that came out from the filming, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, that's Colin Farrell." And I was looking at it, there's no way I could even put it together that it was him. Absolutely amazing job making him completely unrecognizable. And what's really amusing is how much he's actually focused on in the trailer, considering in interviews that he's done where he's mentioned filming the Batman, he has actually said on, in various interviews that he's not in the movie very long. He doesn't have a huge role. He enjoyed being involved, but he didn't have a huge role. Now, obviously he could be saying that for the sake of saying it, because he does have a bigger role than is intended. But based off of what we see here, it seems as if Penguin's going to be a character that Batman comes looking for some sort of information, and then they get involved into a chase where Penguin's trying to get away, and clearly he does not succeed. So it is possible that he does have a smaller role. There's also been word out there that another spinoff that's potentially being conceptualized, at the very least, is one involving Penguin with Colin Farrell for HBO Max, the same way that they're already doing an announced one, at least focusing on the GCPD within the same Matt Reeves Batman universe. So I think it's entirely possible, especially because I think that the actor has the potential of, or I think Colin Farrell has the potential of getting some really high praise based off the fact that he is wearing all these crazy prosthetics that don't make him completely unrecognizable. And it tends to be in Hollywood, when you can do something when you are hindered by prosthetics and things like that, you have a tendency to get a lot of really high acclaim. So there's that. The other big news is that we have the official date. We didn't have the date before. Previously, when the trailer released last year at FanDome, they specifically said that the film was coming out in 2022. And originally, I think actually the trailer said it was supposed to come out 2020, and then it had a question mark where it didn't know when exactly it was coming out. Because if I remember correctly, it was originally planned for release of June of 2021. Filming was delayed, and because the filming was delayed, they ended up pushing it back to October of 2021. And then last October, they said, no, we're just going to move it completely, because they still had some delays that were happening because Pattinson had contracted COVID, and that prevented them from continuing to film on schedule. So they had to push the filming back even more. So then they said it was going to be happening in March of 2022, but they didn't exactly say what date. The end of the trailer clearly states it's coming March 4th, 2022. the plus is that there's not a lot of other big movies on the release schedule when it comes to other studios that are going to hinder the possibility of this film doing really, really well. I'm really excited about this. And I will say those longtime listeners of anything having to do with TBU will probably make the connection. But I'm a huge fan of Matt Reeves because of a specific franchise he has previously worked on that has to do with Planet of the Apes. And I thought he did an amazing job with that franchise and where he took it. And I'm really interested to see what he can do with Batman. And I really like the kind of the situation that he's in right now, where Warner Brothers is much more keen to realizing they need to build more than just a singular movie franchise. They don't want a franchise that just is a movie, another movie in like a couple, 3-4 years, and then another movie in 3-4 years. They're trying to build a larger universe. They were trying to obviously do this prior to Reeves taking over this film, but it didn't work out the way they intended on it. And while they're still obviously trying to connect certain elements of the universe and the films together, the fact that they've got the ability to do, a higher budget TV series on HBO Max that tie into the same universes as the movies, like we're seeing with Peacemaker, tying it, basically a continuation of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad that came out back in August. There's a lot of possibilities. We know that there's going to be a GCPD series tying into this film, the potential of the Batman or the potential of a Penguin series. There's a lot of really cool things that could happen because, as I've said in the past, and I really, really want to happen, it's one thing for a franchise to be really, really good. It's a whole nother thing to build a franchise that can be, I guess the best way to put it is Marvel cinematic, film equivalent, where you have all these films connecting to also TV series and things like that. And I think Batman is probably the prime candidate when it comes to Warner Brothers for something like that to happen.
Yeah, I think, that is the case because Batman's world and his villains are not only so expansive, but also so well known. So right off the bat, you have that foundation that you can build on. And, just to the point about the release date and, no big studios, perhaps you have more insight on, how this actually works. But I believe Marvel had Doctor Strange in the same month. And then after the Batman trailer came out, they moved the release date for Doctor Strange. And I thought that was interesting. In my mind, I think that's because they figured, wow, this is a really good movie. We don't want to compete with it. And so they moved off it, which I think is a good sign. But maybe that's not how studios make their decisions.
I don't know that it was necessarily the main reason. If I remember, I don't remember exactly what the original date for Doctor Strange was, but I do know it's currently now May, and I know it was earlier. I'll try to see if I can figure that out real quick. But I will say it wouldn't be unheard of for Marvel to specifically try to put a film up against something else. If we all remember back when Batman vs. Superman came out, it was only a short amount of time. If I remember correctly, I think it was Captain America, Civil War, of course. That was the one that came out, and it was only just like 2 months after Batman vs. Superman, if I remember correctly. So Batman vs. Superman was kind of like sandwiched between two pretty big Marvel movies that made a boatload of money. And of course, Batman vs. Superman didn't make as much money as the other Marvel films that came out that year. So it's entirely possible that Doctor Strange did move, but I also, just based off of the recent announcement that they shifted a bunch of movies, I think that had a lot more to do with trying to even out their stuff. If you look at DC's release schedule next year, it's insane. There is a lot of movies coming from DC. Outside of the Batman coming in March, we've got Black Adam coming in July. We have Flash coming in November. We've got Aquaman coming in December. There's also a Super Pets animated film coming out in May. I mean, there's practically a DC film that ties to the DC universe in some way or another almost every 2 months next year, which is crazy. And then we also immediately the following year have other movies that are already set too, including Shazam, which is currently wrapping up filming right now as well. So there's a lot of projects that are currently in the works, and that's not even including whatever they've got cooking when it comes to animated series and TV series and animated films and all that other stuff. There's tons of content that's going to be 2022 is going to be a huge year for film when it comes to DC, more so than any other year before.
I just want to address, unless Scott has something to say, I have one quick point on the Batman movie, specifically regarding, what you said earlier about it being a more brutal version. And I've seen this is more of a online internet thing, but I've seen a lot of the discourse online is sort of, comparing the brutality of this Batman to the previous one, which is Ben Affleck's version. And to me, the conversation seems a bit strange, quite honestly, because first of all, we haven't seen this movie yet. We're just going based on the trailer. And I think it's a little weird because people, I'm trying to say this carefully, but I think people get, they get dug in on their, opinion. And I think their opinion is shaped based on how they feel about, certain movies in the past. And I think, but I've seen people suggest that, this Batman is more brutal than the Ben Affleck version. And I just don't see, based on what we've seen so far, how you can say that is the case. Because, the Ben Affleck version was literally machine gunning people to death. And this Batman, Robert Pattinson's Batman is, he's brutal in that he's fighting with his fists, but I'm not seeing that same thing. So I don't know that. I'm just commenting that it's a bit weird to see online, but I'm hoping that we get a Batman that is closer to the sort of ethics that we know from the character in the comics, which is, Batman who maybe is brutal and does fight, but definitely isn't killing people or using guns in that same manner.
I think the big thing for me is he does come across as a more violent version of Batman, but I don't think it's the same way as Affleck's was. Affleck's Batman in the Batman vs Superman, and trust me when I say there was things that I liked about Snyder's version of Batman compared to the things that I didn't like. But but I will say that the interpretation of Batman just straight up killing people, that's not Batman. That's not at all. Obviously there's been plenty of references to people saying as a defense of Batman killing people, oh, well, he killed people in Batman Returns. He dropped a guy into the sewer with a bomb. And that's not the same thing. That's not even remotely the same comparison. Straight up shooting people, using guns. None of that is something that Batman would do. That said, I don't think there's an issue with Batman getting into a fist fight and then beating the pulp out of somebody. I think that's entirely, warranted. But I think that we're seeing a Batman that is trying really, really hard to figure out his way of making everything better. And it's just not working for him. So he's going to get frustrated. We're going to see him be very angry. And when he's pushed, he's going to push back. And I think that is going to be a situation where, imagine that opening scene in the 1989 Batman where you've got those punks that show up and Batman stops him and goes, "Who are you?" And he goes, "I'm Batman." That's basically what Pattinson's Batman is trying to do every time he comes in contact with criminals, because the criminals don't believe that he's actually a force to be reckoned with. So he has to prove himself, and he has to instill the fear amongst the criminal underworld. And this is how he's choosing to do it. Now, do I think that this is the version of the character that's going to last throughout all of the Matt Reeves films? No, I think this is an early Batman who's trying to find his way.
Yeah, honestly, I think people are just probably reading too much into the tone and the atmosphere. Dustin, earlier you mentioned it kind of reminded you of Blade Runner, like the opening of the trailer, with the rain and kind of the slow, steady panning and everything. So I think it's probably a blend of both. Like, people are commenting to comments, and they're reading into the atmosphere too much, which is very much very brooding and kind of has that brooding tone to it. But very noirish, though, I guess you would say, is probably more accurate. And then, there are preconceived notions from the last incarnation, and I guess it's too early to tell. We don't really have, the movie's not out. We have a couple minutes worth of footage, but I guess to me, the tone is different between this and the last iteration. You know, when I think of like Zack Snyder's Batman, I think of Batman versus Superman, and specifically, I think of, I believe it was like the intro scene to like Batman as Batman, not like Bruce Wayne, but like when he's out in the field, and the way Zack Snyder treated that was like a horror movie. These cops go into this house where these people are being held captive. And, you know, the way it's filmed is very much like you would see something from like James Wan or like Blumhouse or something. You know, it's, you know, different tone than, you know, what we've seen so far. What we've seen so far is more of very brooding crime drama.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't mind a Batman who is more violent. Like, so, but there is a line, is what I'm trying to say, right? Like, you know, as Dustin was saying, if you're just machine gunning criminals, that to me is not a Batman I recognize. But if he's in a fist fight with criminals and, you know, he's, you know, punching them and that sort of thing, I'm fine with that, right? Like that is definitely within the realm of, you know, I think what we would consider a normal representation of what Batman has been over the past few decades, maybe even longer. And I think that's what we're going to get here. And exactly as Dustin said, right? Like, I think he's trying to make Batman is trying to make an impression on the city, and also he's younger, so that rage and that anger is still more raw. And I think as he comes into contact with more and more allies, so you know, potentially Catwoman, Commissioner Gordon, maybe even a Robin down the road, because they're using a younger Batman, you know, there is a potential for, you know, sidekicks in sequels. So as more characters from the Batman universe start to become part of that Batman's life, I think we will start to see him become more of, you know, the kind of the character that we see in, I mean, this is a TV show, but like in the Young Justice version, where he's more of this like calmer sort of field general almost. But I don't think we'll see this like, you know, rage-fueled one for the whole time. And I don't think this one is, you know, the same as the Affleck version.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Going back to the release date, originally Doctor Strange was scheduled to come out on March 25th. So definitely it was intended to be coming out within the same month of Batman. But obviously they did not have a set date for Batman up until now. So there's that. But going back to what you brought up earlier, Adil, it's clear that there are some people who see this like violent version of Batman and they have an issue with it. But I think there's a lot of versions of Batman out there. And the one version that sticks out to me that just doesn't work is the one that's mowing people down with a machine gun or just straight up murdering people. That is not the version of Batman that I think anybody likes, except for obviously the people who really enjoyed Zack Snyder's version of Batman. That said, I really truly believe that this is like just the Batman coming into his own, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing here. So, all right, so let's jump over to another live action film real quick before we get into some other stuff. So the other live action film that we know is coming that has to do with the Batman universe specifically is the Batgirl film with Leslie Grace. Now, while it's very early in production, the film is currently in pre-production. Leslie Grace has been cast. We know that they have a directing team that's attached to the film as well. But for the most part, there's not a lot of information that has come out. Leslie Grace did ask the directors if she was going to have red hair. They specifically said, yes, she will have red hair. She will not be wearing a mask, a domino mask, like some of the previous incarnations of live action Batgirls that have come before. Instead, she will be wearing a cowl with the hair outside the back, like we typically see in the comics. The creators have mentioned that Burnside is an influence for the character, but they did not specifically say anything about her having the Burnside costume or anything, just saying that the Burnside comics are an inspiration for the film as well. There's not a whole lot of details. They released one piece of concept art, which was Batgirl standing on a gargoyle in the distance. There really wasn't a whole lot here. I'm not expecting this film to be coming out until 2023, probably just because of how little information we have. It, however, was announced just the other day that there is some cast that has been added to this film, specifically Jacob Scipio. Skypio. I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm sure I am. But it was also confirmed that J.K. Simmons is going to be reprising the role of James Gordon for the film. Simmons, who previously played Gordon in Batman v Superman, as well as the Justice League film. He had a minor role in that film as well. He's coming back. That's not to say that Batman will be played by Ben Affleck, because the creators did say there is, in fact, a Batman in this film. It's not set in a situation. And they also were very explicit about saying, this is their words, not mine. They said the real Batman is going to be in this film. Now, that's not that leads some speculation as to what they are talking about, because there's another film, which we'll talk about in a little bit, The Flash, that's coming out next November, that has two Batman. Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton are both playing Batman in that film. And we also know that obviously Robert Pattinson is playing Batman. So there's 3 different Batmen in live action films next year alone. So that's to say, who will be this real Batman? What do you guys think the real Batman is for this Batgirl film that is coming exclusively to HBO Max?
That's a tough question, because it really isn't much to go by. Part of my brain says well, this is Warner Brothers, their new direction is going to be Robert Pattinson. So he's their main man going forward, or their main Batman, I should say. But the fanboy in me hopes it's, that means Michael Keaton, because, that's my personal favorite. I mean, that was my first Batman. Your first Batman's your favorite, more or less. And so that's mine. But I guess the rational part of my brain would probably lean towards Pattinson.
Yeah, I think Pattinson would have been my guess until you said that J.K. Simmons is coming back as Gordon. So if he is coming back as Gordon, then I would think that Affleck would be the one, just because it's the same universe. But I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know. I mean, we'll probably talk about this later when we talk about The Flash, but I just don't know where they're going with that. That being said, I am excited for the movie. I watched the FanDome clip on the Batgirl movie. I hope it does well, because one of the directors has my name, so I need that. I need that to go well. And the concept, that little concept art that they showed, didn't seem very Burnside to me. So I don't know what they're gonna do with it.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't think the Burnside comments came in that panel. I think it was mentioned in an interview that they did earlier this year when they were talking about the casting of Leslie Grace. They said, I think that's when they mentioned it, but it wasn't like it's supposed to be a huge influence or anything. They mentioned, I think it's more of one of those things where if you're looking at Barbara Gordon comics, recent Barbara Gordon comics, that Burnside run is going to pop up again and again as probably one that not only did well as far as sales go for a while, but also a version of the character that I think really connected to some fans. And I think that's why it's going to get thrown out there. It's the same reason why every time anybody ever does a origin story for Batman, 0 Year always gets thrown out there, because it's the one that everyone associates with Batman's origin. I think that's one of the reasons it popped up. I honestly, this film lends a whole lot of questions, because The Flash is, at least it seems as if it's intending to kind of lean into the idea of multiverses, which is really, really bad timing, because of course, right across the street, Marvel's doing a bunch of multiverse stuff too right now, with the Spider-Man movie coming out in December. And then they've got a movie that literally has multiverse in the title with Doctor Strange next May. But they're clearly going to be leaning into the multiverse angle with more than one Batman. That said, who's to say that at the end of the Flash film, Ben Affleck is the Batman that obviously is there in the beginning when Flash goes and does whatever he does, then comes in contact with Michael Keaton's Batman in a different universe. And then when he eventually comes back, well, whoever that Batman is could end up being the Batman that is the real Batman. So it's not any of the Batman that we're thinking. There's actually a fourth, because they need to go forward with whatever they're doing with the other Justice League films that are not the Pattinson. I'd say the Pattinson one makes the most sense to be the real Batman, but I honestly believe that Reeves is kind of creating his own little universe that's probably on some chart taking place on a separate Earth than all of the other Justice League films and the characters that appeared in the Justice League films. Aquaman was super successful. Wonder Woman has had success. And Flash is going to be the other character that hasn't had anything outside of Cyborg as that group of main characters from the Justice League. Superman, who knows what they're going to do with that. Ben Affleck is coming back for this Flash movie, but there's very little in my mind that makes me think that he's going to be coming back past this Flash movie. And I think this is a way for them to kind of reset whatever they're going to do for the future that involves Batman and these other characters in its own story. And if they introduce the multiverse and it makes sense that there's more than one Earth or whatever, I think that they're going to introduce a new Batman, and that's going to be the same Batman that's going to pop up in this film as well. Moving outside of the live action films, let's jump over to the animated stuff because there's a couple of different announcements that came out. The first one, there was actually a movie that was announced back in August. And if you follow along with news on the website, you probably didn't see anything about it because I didn't see anything about it either. There was a quick article that popped up on the Hollywood Reporter announcing the film called Catwoman Hunted, which is an animated film that's coming next year. During FanDome, they announced that the film is in fact coming February 8th of 2022. It's going to be being released direct to video, as most of the animated films are, on 4K Ultra HD combo pack, Blu-ray combo pack, and digitally, which of course you can pre-order. And if you do so, please use the affiliate link on Amazon so that you can help out TBU in the process. That said, this film is it's a different style of animation. It's more of an anime feel than some of the other animated films that DC has put out. And to me, while it clearly is trying to connect in some ways to some of the stuff that they've been doing more recently with the new versions of the animated characters that they're doing with the animated films, it definitely feels as if it's kind of like the one-off for the year. Meaning a couple years ago, they did Batman Ninja. Last year, they did Batman Soul of the Dragon. This year, they're doing Catwoman Hunted. It feels like it's kind of like an experimentation of different types of animation style that they do once a year. Once a year, they try something different that's outside the realm of what they typically do. That's what this feels like. That said, I'm not saying it looks bad. I think for the story that it seems to be telling, it looks like it could be a very interesting story. We're obviously going to check it out. And when the film releases, we'll be doing a rundown of that here on this podcast. But any thoughts on Catwoman Hunted?
I mean, it looks fun. Like it's hard to say because I personally haven't been the biggest fan of a lot of the animated films. I watch most of them, but never really my jam. But like the trailer looked fun, and something that I kind of liked, I looked at the cast in this movie, it has quite a cool cast, they put together, particularly that jumps out that like stood in my mind is, Keith David is playing Tobias Whale. And then, Jonathan Banks is Black Mask, which I thought was interesting. We're going to get a very grumpy, kind of tired sounding Black Mask, but it could. I'll probably watch it.
I didn't know anything about this film until I saw the trailer. I think this is the same day or the day after FanDome. It looks fun to me. I noticed the animation style looks kind of similar to anime than the usual DC style. The other thing that I noticed from the trailer is that it kind of has this like old spy movie feel to it, almost like a Man from U.N.C.L.E. thing, but like it's DC and it's Batwoman and Catwoman as like a duo. So I just think it looks fun. And I mean, I don't know if it'll connect to anything in the animated movie universe, but it just looks like a fun watch.
The one thing I will say is I enjoy them trying to test different types of animation and see what could work and what doesn't work, what fans really enjoy, what fans don't enjoy, because it shows that they're not necessarily set on one specific way. There's, for a very long period of time, from the point where they did the Flashpoint movie up until Justice League War, there was, or I think it was even past that. There was a whole animation style that all of the characters were based off of the same character designs. They had the same person doing all of the character designs for new characters that were popping up for a very, very, very long time. And now I'm not necessarily opposed to that. And it works obviously very well in the animated series, but when in that regard, a connected universe when it comes to films. But when you're trying to tell stories that aren't necessarily needing to connect to those other films, why not try to experiment and do different animation styles? I think there's the opportunity when given the opportunity to do something like that, why be hindered by the fact that you're doing something where it's set in the same universe. So of course you have to have everything the same. So I think it's cool for them to test this out. The other part of the announcement, or I should say of the panel that they did for Catwoman Hunted, was that they announced some of the films that are coming out next year. Now, most of these aren't necessarily related specifically to stuff that we're going to be covering, but the other films that they're planning on releasing are Green Lantern, Beware My Power, and there's going to be a film called Battle of the Super Sons, which is going to be the first CGI versions of the characters. So the entire film is going to be CG animation rather than hand-drawn animation. There's also the deluxe edition of Batman The Long Halloween, which we already knew was coming. It just connects the first and second parts as one connected film. And then there's also going to be Teen Titans Go and DC Superheroes Mayhem in the Multiverse, which is coming out next year as well. So there's a lot of different things coming out. There's also a DC Showcase collection that's going to be headlined by a new Constantine short as well. So overall, there's a lot going on next year when it comes to the DC universe and animated films. The one thing that I'm sure a lot of people are happy about is because of the large focus on the Batman universe with Batman Long Halloween this year, as well as the Catwoman film that's coming out early next year, they're going to be focusing on some other characters. Green Lantern hasn't had a film in quite some time. And then the Super Sons, obviously Damian's going to play a role in that because he is one of the Super Sons, but the film will focus on other characters as those, at least as the comic series has focused on other characters outside of just the Batman universe characters. So I'm sure fans who have longed for things outside of the Batman universe will be happy. I obviously run a website called the Batman Universe, so that's the stuff that we're interested in. But there are some of these projects we'll still be reviewing on the website, and some of them we'll be talking about here on the podcast as well. All right, so to wrap up the episode, the other big stuff that came out of DC FanDome was all the other DC film stuff that's coming out next year. We're not going to spend an entirely too much amount of time talking about every single one of these, but there's a lot of films coming out next year, like I mentioned earlier. We've got Black Adam coming out in July. We've got Aquaman coming out in December. We've got Shazam coming out in probably early 2023. I'm guessing the February-March slot for that film of 2023. And then we have The Flash coming out in November of 2022. And The Flash had a little bit of a teaser. It really wasn't a full trailer, and there really wasn't a whole lot that they showed off. But we know going into The Flash that Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton are both playing Batman in the film. And based off of what you saw, any predictions on what we can expect to see from these characters?
I'm actually very worried about that movie. So Ezra Miller in the little preview where he was introducing the clip, and he looked like he had no enthusiasm for it, which, I mean, is fine. He might just be tired or whatever. But the actual teaser that they released, it seemed more to do with Batman, which, I mean, we work for a site called the Batman Universe, so that's not entirely a bad thing. However, I mean, just for the movie itself, it's a Flash movie, and I feel like there's not enough focus on that. Now, it could be, as you said earlier, they're using this to sort of reset the universe, and I think the only way that would make sense then is that if Pattinson is the final Batman remaining at the end of this, because Keaton is doing this as kind of like a homage or tribute kind of thing, just like a one last run for like an actor who played a very classic version of the character. Affleck is doing this as just like his goodbye. As you said, I don't think any of us are expecting him to be back. And, just because of, Keaton doing this as a homage thing, I don't think he's going to be back either. So that leaves the question of who is, going to be the new Batman or the last Batman standing. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to introduce yet another one when there's already one that looks like it's going to be very popular. I don't know how, Reeves will feel about that or whatnot, but it'll be interesting to see. I think the Flash movie right now needs to really focus more on, building the Flash. And I think this is the problem that the DC universe ran into early on, is that they were focusing more on these connections rather than building up the individual franchises first. And I think you have to build up the individual characters and the franchises and get people attached to those versions of them before you start to do all the connections. Because if you do those connections first, then I think people just won't care. Marvel is doing their multiverse now, after like 22, 23, however many movies they've done and however many TV shows. So I'm a bit concerned about that movie, but we'll see. It's still very early.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess, thinking about it, I echo some of your concerns, because in a lot of ways, everything we do know about this movie, you're right in the sense that it kind of feels like, either like a Batman nostalgia vehicle with Keaton and then one final goodbye for Batfleck, or a bridge movie where it's just trying to set up the next, films down the road. So it, that makes sense. And honestly, I guess, we haven't really seen much different. I mean, this whole sneak peek was, it started off with music from the 1989 movie, and then it goes into a very, small tease of, the Keaton Bat from behind, and obviously I don't think they're going to show anything of him in like full form in a teaser before the Batman comes out, because it doesn't seem to be a smart marketing move to advertise a different Batman ahead of like your big tentpole Batman film.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're going to run into a problem where, I think it was last year, there was an interview that was done with Jim Lee and Walter Hamada, and they were talking about, or maybe it was during FanDome itself, they were talking about like the future of DC films, and they made a comment about how for a while there was this thought that fans could not have more than one version of a character, and because of that, they were very hesitant about doing different things with different characters. That's why whenever they had a TV show that was doing well, they would keep certain characters away from the TV show that they could potentially use somewhere else. Case in point, there was obviously that whole mandate back when Smallville was on screen where they couldn't reference Batman in any way, shape, or form, because that was around the same time that the Nolan franchise was, in the middle of being created with Batman Begins, and then later on with The Dark Knight. So they didn't want to touch Batman, even though they had other characters from DC showing up on the series like Green Arrow, like Flash, even if they were short stints on the show. And I think that last year they made that comment about how, yes, fans are smart enough to realize that you can have a version of a character on television and in the films at the same time. There's no reason you couldn't do more than one. And I think that's true to a degree, but it does beg the issue of the marketing. Like you mentioned, Scott, like marketing is a huge deal. And to pretend that there's that all people are absolutely smart enough to get that there's more than one Batman, I think that's giving a lot of people a lot of credit that they don't deserve. I think that comic book fans and the hardcore fans who are going to see the film more than once, they're the ones who are potentially going to understand the concept of having more than one Batman. But I think the general audience that's not, as keen to how comic stories work and things like that, I don't think that they're going to get the idea of there being multiple Batman at the same time and be able to understand it. Now, that's not to say that couldn't change. Obviously, we've got a Spider-Man movie that's going to be setting up potentially multiple Spider-Men, and then maybe that kind of like paves the way for multiple Batman down the road. And maybe that's what they're hoping for. But I think that as it goes, the trailer, or the teaser, I should say, the teaser, it was great, but I don't know anything about the film. I mean, other than Batman showing up, clearly Barry Allen goes and has some sort of duplicate of himself, and they go find Michael Keaton's Batman, who's obviously a much older version of Batman. We know Ben Affleck shows up in the film, but he's not in the teaser. We know that there's going to be plenty of callbacks to Batman 1989 in the film because Michael Keaton's Batman is showing up. But that's not. But we don't know anything about the film. We don't know what's taking place. We know that Supergirl's in the film. We don't know how that plays into anything. There's a lot of unknowns with this movie, probably more so than any of the other DC films that are out there, because even Shazam, that's currently not scheduled. I just checked the release date. It's not actually scheduled release date until June of 2023 at this moment. It's not to say that it couldn't change. I found out more about that film by watching their little panel that they had for Shazam, more so than the Flash movie that comes out almost 6 months or more than 6 months prior to that film. Even Aquaman that comes out after Flash, we found out more about what's the movie, what's intended to be in the movie than we did for the Flash. I think that right now that movie is really heavily relying on the fact that Batman is going to carry them into the good graces of comic book fans and potentially some box office success to a degree. But I think that movie, there's so little known about it other than comic fans realize that there's some multiverse shenanigans going on. And that's the extent of what anybody knows about that film.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing as well. I was just thinking of it as you were talking. I get suspicious, as I said before, I get suspicious when, the marketing for a film is not about what the film is. It's more about how it connects to things, because those connections should be icing on the cake. It shouldn't be the main thing itself. And then, the other thing I think they need to be careful of is the fact that there are certain concepts that work better or that work in the comics medium or in the animated medium that don't work as well in the live action medium. And I think this might be one of them that doesn't really connect to the general audience. I think, comic fans like us will be more or less fine with it. But there is a limit too, because even with the Flash TV show, I'm a comic fan and I had to leave because there were 7 versions of the Flash in his mom's house when his mom got murdered. There at some point it becomes just too much, and I think they have to be really careful because they don't want to turn general audiences off using that concept.
All right, so with that, I think that's a good point to wrap up this episode. Thank you guys for taking a listen, and if you have any thoughts about any of the upcoming film slate, whether it be live action or animated, whether it be the Batman universe or the DC universe, leave your comments wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether they be on social media. We have we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can leave us comments there, and we'll discuss those comments in the future. We'll bring back some of the comments or questions. If you've got questions about thoughts about these trailers or these panels or the news, let us know about those questions and we'll bring those questions back on future episodes. In addition to that, if you are interested in chatting with us on a normal basis, join our Discord. That is where you will find not only us, all 3 of us are on our Discord, but we also have all the other staff members from the TBU website. We also have a ton of other Bat fans that talk at length about all kinds of topics related to movies, TV, merchandise, video games, comics, everything you could imagine related to the Batman universe. So be sure to check that out. Links can be found in the description of the podcast, but also on our website, thebatmanuniverse.net. If you are so inclined, as you probably heard in the very opening tag, we do have a Patreon. That is greatly appreciated if you could support us on Patreon. One of the perks for having access, or one of the perks you get by supporting us on Patreon, is actually early access to these episodes. You'll get these episodes prior to the normal release to the general public, and they are uncut. So you'll hear all of the unnecessary stuff that we end up cutting out because we undoubtedly always have some sort of hiccup that happens when we're recording. So please support us if you can. And if you are unable to support us monetarily, please check out the Support TBU spot on the website. That is where you'll find a number of affiliate links that you can shop at a variety of different retailers. We get a small commission on any of the purchases. That money immediately goes back into the website to help the website grow and be able to do more and more content and cover more and more things. And last but not least, if you are interested in joining TBU and helping out, we are always looking for a variety of different people to help the website succeed. We all work on volunteer basis because we love sharing our love for Batman with other Bat fans across the world. So if you have any skills you'd like to share, please get in touch with us at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net. For Adil, Scott, and myself, thank you so much for listening to the Batman Universe podcast. We will see you guys next time.